Hey everyone, welcome back to the shop. Today we are going to be pulling the motor out of this 2003 Honda S2000. So far, started with some of the basic stuff, getting it pulled out. We'll kind of go over that right now. What I have done so far is basically just remove the air box, undone the radiator upper and lower hoses, drain the coolant out, undid the throttle cable, also pulled the air conditioning compressor off, undid the AC lines, and also have done the shifter inside here. Pulled the center console cover off, popped the shifter off, because how I'm going to drop this out is I'm going to drop it using the K-member. Some guys will pull the transmission out and pull the engine out vertically. On this, I'm going to drop the engine transmission all in one from the bottom of the vehicle on top of the K-member. I think that's going to be faster. And then we'll raise it up and show you what I've done on the bottom here as far as disassembling. So up here, there is a little mount that sits right here. Undone that. There's a splash shield on the bottom. Just undid that mainly to make, so it doesn't make a mess when I drain the coolant out. Back here, we have pulled the drive shaft out and also undone the flange here for the head pipe to the catalytic converter. One thing you want to make sure of doing is there is 4 little bolts that hold the shifter boot to the floor of the car. You want to make sure and get those because that's attached to the transmission as well. So that's some of the little things I've done so far to get this motor out. I've also undone the 6 bolts that hold the cradle to the unibody. There's 3 on each side. I've just loosened those a couple turns just to get them loose, make sure they're not rusted, and just drop it down a little bit to make sure that it's going to come down without any major problems. Like I said, this car's almost 20 years old. It is a rust-free car, but you just never know when they get that old, problems you may run into. So now I'm going to let it down and we are going to finish undoing some of the smaller hoses on the motor and the fuel line as well. There's also a couple of battery cables you want to undo as well, and we'll get to those as well. So next step is basically removing some of these heater hoses and stuff that are still attached to the motor, and some of the vacuum line and stuff that come over here that need to undo to drop the motor down. What I have also done that is easier to do it this way is I've undone the ECM harness. I'll show you that as well. So on the floor here on the driver's side, there are 3 plugins right here. There's 1, 2, 3. These 2 go to the ECM, and this one goes here. Unplug those 3 and then just push the harness through the firewall, and then that will all stay attached to the motor. So most of the plugs to the motor with all the sensors and whatnot will stay attached to the motor, and it makes it a lot easier because some of these are really hard to get to underneath the intake manifold. If you leave that attached and pull the harness through the firewall and just leave it attached, it makes it easier to drop out the bottom. So that's what we've accomplished so far. From here on out, we'll keep plugging away at this and see if we can get this motor out. Okay, so one thing I did forget to mention, got the car up in the air here and just gonna go over a few other things. So up here under the steering linkage from the steering shaft to the rack, pretty simple to do. And then there's a couple of wire harnesses that go to this as well. Just unplug those And from here on out, we are going to undo the sway bar. There's 4 bolts there. Going to leave it attached to the lower cradle. Going to undo the struts and going to undo the ball joints here. Take the nuts off, pop that off, and leave that attached to the cradle as well to help drop that down. One thing that maybe some of you might be wondering is what's going on with the floor here. So when I built the shop, I had some extra underlayment for the roofing, and it is waterproof, oil-proof. So I basically just put it down to help catch any oil, coolant stuff that drops on it. I just had it left over from when I built the shop, so it makes it kind of nice, help keep the floor a little bit clean, saves on the floor dry a little bit. It gets torn up, messy, whatever. Just throw it down a little bit more. When it runs out, I'll just have to go back to the old school method of scrubbing my shop floor. But anyway, we will continue with the car here and finish getting some of these bolts off, get some of this disconnected, and continue the process of getting this motor out. Okay, here we are. We've got pretty much everything unplugged and unhooked, I hope. Since the last clip, we did the cradle bolts, all 6 of them. The transmission bolts in the back, undid the tie rod ends, lower control arms, and the steering linkage with the sway bar as well. So now we're going to try and drop it down and see what happens. I'm going to slowly raise it up and hopefully she comes out okay. Now I'm going to crawl underneath here and look and see, make sure everything else is looking good. Everything's supported by jack stands on 3 points, 1 on the transmission, 2 on the cradle, and we'll keep raising this out and see what happens. Those of you paying close attention as we're lifting this up, notice there was one wire that was started to pull on, and that is this wire that goes from the back of the engine up over here. It's actually the starter main power wire. Goes to the firewall and then runs underneath this box here, up underneath the fuse block here, and if I can get this open, to this pin right here. So pretty easy, just pop that off, undo it, and drop it on the motor, and now we should be set to finish raising it up out. Raise, lower, however you want to say it. Gonna do one final check, make sure everything's good, and raise the car up. And then I want to mention though, I did position my jack stands incorrect on this lower cradle. They should have been further back, positioned where the motor mounts are. All I've done is I've got a jack underneath right now and 1 more jack stand for 5 points of contact. Not really a big deal. Basically, I'm just gonna pull this out, get my engine hoist out, take the motor back off of the cradle, put the cradle back on the car so I can get the car to the shop while I'm doing the engine rebuild. And here we go. This should be the final lift. Everything looks good under here still. Oh, and it's pissing on my floor. That's what happens. And there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is probably the easiest way I can think of to take the motor out of a 2009 Honda S2000 for engine swap, engine rebuild, whatever you got to do to the engine. It's definitely faster, I think, than all that is time, but you know, to each their own. Anyway, engine is out, car's in the air, and we will continue from here. Okay, so again, I picked this car up from a nicer lady that unfortunately had catastrophic engine damage to it. After doing some preliminary work, determined it's main bearing that failed. But we will pull this thing apart and see how bad the engine damage is, see if it is fixable, if it's cost effective to fix it, and go from there. So stay tuned for the next video. That's where we will tear into this thing and we'll see what's going on inside. Thanks for watching, everyone.